Welcome back to Close Up. Polling continues to show a clear frontrunner in the GOP primary for governor, and that is former U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte, and she joins us in studio this morning. Thanks for being here.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Adam. Thanks.
So Senator Morse was just on and making a case against you in this primary, saying essentially that, you know, after leaving Washington, you've gone corporate, that you've somehow enriched yourself in your years since leaving the U.S. Senate. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's ridiculous, Adam. I've spent my life in New Hampshire. I was born here. We raised our children here. I helped my husband start a small business, landscaping and snow plowing business. I used to shovel at night and go to my day job as a murder prosecutor at the AG's office. I was the Attorney General of this state. So, you know, I love New Hampshire, and this is a great state. And what's ridiculous about his argument is that, yes, I have private sector experience, including, by the way, chairing the board for BAE Systems, our largest manufacturing employer in the state. So I bring that experience to bear also in the corner office, along with having served as U.S. Senator, Attorney General. But I'm a New Hampshire girl at heart, always have been.
You know, the big thing that the Democrats are talking about right now, and Senator Morse as well, is the service on the Blackstone board, the nation's largest landlord. It's likely if you're the nominee, the Democrats are going to be bludgeoning you with ads saying that Kelly Ayotte helped cause the housing crisis here. How are you going to respond to that?
Well, first of all, that's just false. And here's where we are. We have a real housing problem here in New Hampshire. We have a lack of supply. So as governor, I'm going to champion building more housing of all forms, whether it's single-family homes, apartments, manufactured housing. We need all of it, because without that supply, obviously you're in a situation where people can't find a place they can afford to live. And, you know, I go back to my time when I served in the Senate. I worked on these issues. You know, I supported and not only worked to support the low-income housing tax credit, but I pushed to expand it by 50%, to push block grants to New Hampshire. So I know this issue well. We have to solve it locally. I'm going to bring everyone to the table, both the local officials, the state officials, and the private sector, to make sure that we're all working together to build more housing in this state so people can afford a place to live. That's the priority. Solving
it locally, how do you crack open those communities that don't want development where it could be added?
Well, I think, Adam, what we need to do first, model good behavior at the state level. So let's make sure that our process at the state level, you know, with state approvals, with DOT, DES, Fish and Game, that's really efficient and that people get an answer within a certain period. So we're going to make sure that's the case. And then we're going to go and get local officials at the table and say, okay, are there infrastructure needs that we can partner with you on if you add more affordable housing? And we'll work together on this issue. We've always had a respect for local decision making, and that's important in New Hampshire, but the state can be a partner, and I look forward to doing that because this is such an economic issue. Every employer that I visit in the state is saying, listen, workforce, and our workers need housing, and these are our friends, our neighbors. You think about police, fire, teachers, we just need more housing.
If the polling is accurate, it could very easily be you against former Manchester Mayor Joyce Craig in the general election. She's been running on her record as mayor of Manchester. If this is a matchup, give us a preview. How do you make the case against her?
Well, I think the case against her is pretty clear. When she was mayor of this city, her really failed leadership. I mean, you walk down the streets of Manchester when she was mayor, and what did you smell? Urine, feces, needles. I talked to downtown business owners in in Manchester, and they couldn't even get an answer from her. Like, her answer was like, throw your hands up in the air. That's not leadership. And then obviously we had incidences of violent crime. This, to me, what happened in this city is an example of what we don't want to have happen in New Hampshire. So I look forward to talking about her record as a leader because it's a failed record. And I have a strong record of working with law enforcement as Attorney General of this state, as a murder prosecutor, how to keep Manchester strong and the state strong. And yesterday I received the endorsement of the current mayor of Manchester, Mayor Rouet, who's working very hard to turn the city around. And I look forward to being a partner with him.
One of your big issues on the campaign trail, one of the big issues for Mayor Rouet in his race was the 2018 bail law that made it much easier for offenders to avoid jail after arrest for all kinds of crimes, really. The legislature just did something on this that was really substantive, perhaps for the first time in about 6 years. It took them a long time to come around on that. What if that doesn't have the intended results? What are you going to do?
Well, Adam, I'm actually, I'm glad that they took that step. It's important. But I am worried that it didn't go far enough, because when they made the law changes, they shouldn't have made those changes, first of all. We know the examples of the cases that happened, like the ride-along I did with the Manchester police officer who had his pinky nearly gnawed to the bone and lost 6 months of work because someone was out on bail that shouldn't have been. We know the examples. You've talked about them on the news show. So I worry that where we are, listen, I'm glad they took a step forward, but I'm going to be vigilant on this issue as governor. I want us to make sure we have a strong bail law, that it's not a revolving door. And if there are any issues with this, I'm going to be pushing for tougher laws. And I actually am just worried that they didn't go far enough.
You're running as a law and order candidate. How do you respond when you hear former President Trump talk about people on January 6th who attacked the Capitol, were assaulting police officers, indicating that he wants to provide them with some kind of lenience? Do you agree with that?
Well, Adam, I think people know my record as a prosecutor. I was always tough but fair. And when I look at people who violate the law, listen, everyone has to be accountable for their actions. And so that's always been my perspective as a prosecutor. And so those federal cases will go forward, and I'm sure that those prosecuting it will handle as they deem appropriate under the law and with fairness. But here in New Hampshire, we need to make sure that we remain the safest state in the nation. And I can tell you what keeps me up at night as I'm campaigning, that we're down 64 troopers, that we're down 50% of corrections officers, that Manchester's down 20 officers, that Nashua's down 20 officers. This recruitment and retention issue is so important. And as governor, it's going to be a top priority of mine in terms of what do we need to do to keep New Hampshire safe, to make sure that our law enforcement officers, we have a competitive retirement system, that we have their backs.
Let's cut the Trump out of it. Is it a bad idea to pardon people who attacked the Congress to try to interrupt the counting of electoral votes?
Well, listen, I can tell you what, as governor, how I'm going to take this, the responsibility of pardoning. I think it's got to be used very, very sparingly, and it has to be in an exceptional situation. And, I look at some of these murderers that, by the way, some of them I prosecuted that come before the council. I mean, like, I say to myself, are you kidding me? So I can just tell you what I'm going to bring to the table as governor. And, I believe in holding people accountable. I do believe in fairness, but at the end of the day, if you committed a crime, you have to really be responsible for that.
Governor Sununu just endorsed you, and you were recently asked about what you might do differently from him, and I was interested to hear you brought up the congressional maps. Yeah. Obviously, the last map that the legislature sent to him, which he vetoed, would have created a more red-leaning district in CD1 and a more blue-leaning district in CD2. That map situation hasn't been resolved. So if you're the governor and the legislature is still Republican, they send you that map again, will you sign it?
I obviously have to look at the specific map, but I would certainly look at that very carefully and be open to that.
Part of the allure for some people, some voters with Governor Sununu, is that, when people expect him to zig, he zags. And that this was one of those issues.
Governor Sununu is his own person.
Right.
I respect that. I'm the same way.
But
I always have been.
This is a purple state, right? And the idea is that somehow his contention was it would damage the political culture of the state if you had 2 safe seats in Congress.
Well, listen, Adam, I will never do anything to damage the political culture. One thing that I feel firmly about, that I know you do as well, is our First in the Nation primary, and making sure that we're strong on that. And we didn't like what happened in this last presidential election. It needs to be a vibrant primary. And so I can tell you as governor, I'm going to obviously make sure that New Hampshire remains a very vibrant political state. And that, to me, that grassroots politics, that's going to be my focus. And I obviously want to make sure that whatever we do on the redistricting front is fair.
You're on the air telling Granite Staters you're going to protect the status quo on abortion in New Hampshire, no
Yes.
matter what. Defend the law as it stands right now. If the change is coming from Washington, right, as improbable as that might be, but if the change is coming from Washington, be it from Democrats or Republicans, are you still going to fight to try and retain what New Hampshire has done?
Yes, I am, because what the Supreme Court did is turn this issue back to the states. New Hampshire passed a law. That law allows women the freedom to obtain an abortion up to 6 months of pregnancy for any reason. And in the last 3 months, as you know, there are exceptions for medical emergency or a fatal fetal anomaly. I will protect that law. I will defend that law. I will not change that law. And if Washington tries to tell New Hampshire what to do, I will fight Washington, because I believe this is a state issue, that New Hampshire should decide this issue, and we should have the New Hampshire law, a New Hampshire solution to an issue that I understand people feel strongly about.
So even if it's a ban coming from Washington,
I'll fight it.
Okay, so
I will fight it, Adam, because I think that is not what the Supreme Court said. The Supreme Court said the states should decide this issue. New Hampshire has decided this issue. We need a New Hampshire way forward. And to me, that is always going to be my priority as governor. And I can tell you, because I served as a U.S. Senator, I know how to fight Washington. And I know how to fight Washington on behalf of the people of this state. And I would be proud to do that because Washington often gets things wrong.
We asked a question of Senator Morse, you know, the next governor might have to cut spending. There might be a tighter budget. Where do you think that cut should come from? You know, this is already a pretty svelte state government as it is. Where do you cut if you need to?
Well, Adam, first of all, we need to make sure, if you look over the last biennium, that was about a 10% increase in the budget. So first of all, there is a rainy day fund, and that I'm glad the legislature has been responsible with that and putting money away. But we're going to live within our means. So we need to do things better. We need to look at what are we doing and how can we do it better. I think there are ways we can use technology better to serve people. That's critical. We're also going to make sure that the most vulnerable are protected. But this is an important time to have a strong governor that can be responsible in terms of spending and not pass on costs. And I look at what the Democrats are pushing, and I think their first instinct would be to increase taxes. And where does that hit? That hits people in New Hampshire that are already struggling during a difficult economic time. I'm always going to think about how will this impact people who are already working hard in this state. So we'll get at the table. We'll make sure that we're responsible in the budget, put forward a balanced budget, work with the legislature, and we'll do this in a smart, responsible way that protects those that are most vulnerable.
All right, Senator Ayotte, thanks for joining us on Close Up. We appreciate the time.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here.
And we'll be right back to go inside the numbers on a new St. Anselm College Survey Center poll that shows some interesting dynamics in that CD2 primary among Democrats.